Welcome to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV, Barry and Mike. Times, they are changing, and we thought we got into a groove in sort of life 2.0, and I'm glad to be having this show with you, Mike. I'm glad that you've got your finger on the pulse of the real estate market, because not long ago we had a planner in here who we leaned on to try and get a sense of what life was going to look like going forward, and how was our new reality going to force the development community and municipal planners to change. And we got some really good advice, some sage advice, but you're here to actually throw another little twist into that, and let's talk about that.
Not so much a twist as to just pull from some of that dialogue we had with the RIA president, Sean Morrison, who is a wealth of information. He's got his finger on the pulse of what's going on in our industry in Ontario and across the country, really. And I was listening to him on another podcast recently, and he was talking with Nick Nanos Reed, he's the numbers man for Canada. And he pays close attention to our real estate market as well. And what they were noticing and talking about, which I thought we could talk about a bit here today and put our own opinion and thoughts on it, is there's been a shift away from this rush towards buying condos in Toronto. They built a lot of condos down there over the last 10, 15 years. And that's been the primary choice for a lot of millennials buying into the market, partly because affordability dictates that's the available product at the lower end price-wise. But I think what we're seeing now, and what they notice, is there's a shift away, at least in some of the polls they did. Millennials now are kind of shifting back. They're becoming their parents, and they're going to hate to hear me say that, but they're wanting the backyard. They're wanting the bigger lot. They're wanting the suburbs. They're wanting to step away from the 700 square foot downtown condo living. And partly maybe they're aging too, because, in your 20s and 30s, living in a downtown is fun. But you hit into your late 30s and 40s and families starting that, you want that neighborhood, you want community, you want that backyard and be able to entertain friends and neighbors.
I'm going to poke at that just a little bit with a smile. I mean this with so much love and respect. It goes back to the age-old thing that says, be careful what you wish for. And we did see a trend for a while where you're absolutely right. The millennials, and that's not, some people have used millennials as a derogatory term. It's just like anything else.
No, it's not. It's the largest segment of our population. It's bigger than the boomer demographic ever was. So it's important.
But we did that the millennials challenged the norm, challenged tradition, challenged age-old norm, and said,
they redefined it for sure.
Exactly. I don't need a big house with a whole bunch of rooms that I'm going to vacuum my way out of and never use, or put plastic on the furniture. I don't need a car, and I don't need an SUV, and I don't even need a driver's license. There are so many millennials, certainly who live in the core, who are quite satisfied, happy to not pay $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a year in auto insurance. They'll rent the car when they need it, the Zip car or the car sharing programs, Uber, etc. And they're quite happy to live in their small space where they lay their head, or maybe do some work, or maybe have some personal time, but then use the community around them for the gym, the shared space in the condominium, or whatever it may be. Now, like I said, I was only meaning that with a smile on my face about poking, but we are now living in a new reality. We're now living in an era where even that convention has received a challenge, and we've been forced to redefine where we're working, how we're working. I can't, I have to wear my mask in my elevator in my own condominium or my own apartment building. Use my shared accommodations or my shared spaces. So now I'm wondering if they're thinking, well, wait a second, maybe that pendulum swung a little bit too far. Maybe I do want a little bit around
certainly when health is a concern, you become very much aware of that congestion of living, where you may not have pre-pandemic been paying much attention to it. But I think there's always been a certain segment of the population who gravitates towards downtown living, like the television show Seinfeld, downtown New York. There's people who will do that. But I also think for many, it's maybe just one early phase in their life. They're realizing now it's not a long-term trend. Everyone's going to move, live their lives out in the downtown and retire down there. I think we may have mistaken that as the reality, when I think it's maybe just a phase or a fad, and now people are doing it and have done it, and now they want to step away. Others are looking at it, but maybe not through the same light because they're worried about health and safety concerns. And
Sure.
they're shifting, and because we're spending more time at home as a result of, we're looking at home differently too. We're
Well,
not
I think,
just
Mike,
showing up at 8 o'clock at night after work, going for dinner, then go home, sleep, get up and do it all over again. We want a full experience with our homes. We want to be able to bring our friends and our family over. We want to be able to go out in the backyard and do things that you just can't do in a 700-foot condominium.
So, Mike, I think what we're doing, we just got about a minute and a half before we go to break, but and so let's not blow the punchline for the next segment. But really, I think what you're talking about is we had Ray Duhamel on the show a number of weeks back. I don't know if it was just over 2 months or so back. And he talked to us about the fact that the developers and the builder marketplace, or the builders who are bringing product to market, are certainly going to be looking at how they reshape or redefine the space, the livable space. He was very clear to state affordability is still going to be a factor. Affordability didn't change because of COVID-19. So certainly how we maybe repurpose the space, you might see a disappearance of those balconies that nobody uses, and that might come into the home, become the home, something like that.
Well, let's unpack that after the break, because I think there's probably some different perspectives with regards to living wants and needs and availability in the GTA versus Barrie. And let's look into that a little bit and see where those differences lie.
Absolutely. But before, here's the thing that we can really package this section up with, and that is the fact that people have had to constrain themselves, not travel, certainly not leave the province or the country as much as they have in the past, essential travel only. And we are starting to see more use of stay-at-home, staycation, recreation, bicycling, canoeing, kayaking, camping, all those sorts of things. So when we come back from the break, let's touch on two things. One, what's going on in the GTA and what we've referred to as the exodus of the GTA? How does that impact Barrie and surrounding area, or outlying communities in general? And how have our habits changed and suddenly our interests changed? But stick with us here on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV Barrie, and we'll be right back after the short break. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV Barrie. Mike, we're into an interesting conversation because we're all Ontarians, we're all Canadians, we all have family values and priorities, etc., but we're not all living the same lives. And we were talking before we went to the break about differences in preference and differences in needs, and what priorities have been prior to COVID and what they appeared to be sort of during and post, not post-COVID, but post 2.0, if you will. And let's get into that, Mike, because it's plain and simple. There are different markets and there are different needs and products available in the marketplace.
And different ideals on what,
to meet those priorities. And we were talking about millennials, how they sort of were game changers and instrumental in forcing the development community to think differently, and also the municipalities to think differently about how they proceed with urban planning. So here we are again, a couple of short years, if you will, into that shift, and we're being forced to shift again. Let's talk about what is life like down in the GTA for those, or what was life like down in the GTA for those who were living there, who have now decided that they want to be moving to regions outside the GTA because their jobs don't require them to be there. They can work from home, or their priorities are different. But what can they also when they move outside the GTA? The first thing that came to mind for me was, as much as I respected and loved the idea that they were living in condos, but really embracing the community all around, they were able to go to the main floor or the basement and hop on, walk down the path and hop on the mass transit. We don't have that anywhere outside the GTA.
Well, you're going to get a
What are
little
your,
snow or a little water on you at some point if you're a commuter from your condo in Barrie versus downtown Toronto. Yeah, you don't have
yeah,
that
so
same
explore that.
convenience. Well, there's two sets of GTA buyers coming to Barrie. There's those first-time buyers who are, as Sean Morrison, and I love this quote from him, was, yeah, you drive till you qualify. And you've got
Yeah.
those buyers who are coming there. They want that detached house, but they're not going to afford it in the GTA because the reality is most of it is over $1 million. It's a lot of money to put out for your first starter home when you're in your 20s or 30s.
Right.
Then there's those downsizers. There's the people who raised their family in their house in Etobicoke or Scarborough. They bought in for 200 or less back in the 70s or 80s. Now they're sitting on a gold mine. They've got $1 million plus home. They don't need all the space. They're selling. They're coming up here. They're finding themselves can move into a nice little bungalow and maybe with some leftover cash do some traveling. You've got a lot of them coming up here. And then you've just got others who are in those condos that have bought over the last 10, 15 years in Toronto, who sat at home for 3 months, staring into the abyss in their 700 square foot room and went, okay, remember that house we were thinking of buying 5, 10 years down the road? Let's do it right now. Let's get out of here. And they're coming up here. But what's interesting is a lot of the developers in Barrie are putting together plans. We have a lot of projects that are slated and ready to go, and they're multi-residential. Now, I think they'll fill those places. They will get, because I think if nothing else, a lot of investors are going to buy those and they will become rental product, a lot of those units. But it won't be the GTA exodus coming in to move into our smaller condo units. They will be, again, coming here for the detached homes. But I wonder, though, because we have annexation lands where we've already put the plans in place, and certainly I think the multi-residential weighed heavy on the decisions for how that was going to be developed. I wonder if we could jump into the time machine with what we know now, if the city planners, and you were part of that process there, would be maybe looking at it through a different lens, wondering maybe we need more detached versus the multi-residential in those properties. And then Innisfil as well has this Orbit project, which we've talked about on the show. We had Lynn Dolan on the show, mayor of Innisfil. We talked about this. That's predominantly multi-residential as well. Are some of these projects maybe, I don't want to say short-sighted, but the sites they had were for a different time pre-pandemic?
Right. So let's get into some of that. I think you raise a lot of really relevant points, Mike. And first and foremost, I think one of the things that we have to look at is that pre-March, pre-February, March, the development community was building a certain amount of inventory, and the city was also releasing land and approvals based on a predetermined phasing that took into account what the natural growth of the area might be, including natural growth from within the community of people who are already living here and growing, whether that's seniors aging in place or whether that's young people finishing with their higher education or getting right back into the workforce and starting a family. And then you also had to factor for some migration, either immigration into the country or interprovincial, or literally from the GTA migrating into the area here. And there was a certain amount of inventory that was planned for built along with infrastructure, et cetera. Now suddenly that's been turned on its head, because as we, even if our region here gets 1% of the migration that's leaving the GTA, that appears to be leaving the GTA, that really throws a wrench in the numbers here from a planning perspective for a couple of reasons. One, who's going to be absorbing the new builds, and does that create a bit of a bidding war, a price war, when it's not just the locals who are buying up the inventory, but if you factor also that we've got people who might be selling there, as you said, the home that they bought for $200,000, but the gold mine that they land on that they found themselves sitting on that they sell for 1.2 million, and they're buying a $600,000 home here. That $600,000 home here is actually inching up the average. The average home was around 450 to 475 in Barrie. Now you've got some competition. That's going to actually increase.
And that will continue. Yeah, it's not local buyers who are setting the prices in the market. It's the outside influence, and that's going to continue.
Right.
Something else I, if I may, are you
finished? Go to break, Mike. Though, just before we go to break, let's finish that thought. And the other thing that's going to play a factor is that rental inventory, right? So whereas you would have had people naturally buying versus renting, now you've got people leaving the GTA, leaving their rentals where they were paying $3,000, $3,500 a month, being able to purchase for less in our region. So they're going to buy up that inventory. I want you to hold that thought, Mike, because we are going to go to break, and then I'm going to let you come in fresh and lead the way. But stick with us here on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif on Rogers TV, Barrie, and we'll be right back after the short break.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and we've been talking about a lot of the activity and the shift in activity that's happening with real estate. But one thing we cannot ignore, and we've got to address, is the fact that, well, some may have their finances protected and have been able to carry through. Government has been providing assistance for a lot of people too. There's many who their employment situation is going to change. Excuse me, many business owners who are going to find themselves, maybe they've been just using up their savings to keep going up until now. But if the pandemic continues, or for another 3-6 months or longer, or if we get a second wave, especially, I think we're probably, a lot of the businesses that have survived till now, the next 6 months is going to be a different story. They may have had that buffer to survive the first wave, but a second wave is going to knock a lot of people out, which is going to force sales of homes, which is going to push a lot of people from the home ownership market into the home rental market. So let's talk a little bit about that and what may come of that.
Yeah, Mike. Yeah, I think, I mean, we talked about that probably pushing 6 months ago almost now. And the fact of the matter is that I think it was fair game to say that if your business wasn't prepared to weather a storm of 30 to 90 days, this wasn't COVID's. It was to some degree a lack of planning, or maybe playing a little bit of gambling of next week I'll start saving, next week I'll start putting in reserves.
Well, it's a reality. Blame aside, it's a reality.
Fair commentary, though, I think, Mike, and I think the numbers are. I mean, we're not going to sugarcoat this at all. I think we heard from the premier, we heard from statistics that somewhere in and around, and I can't quote this right now because you're just throwing this off the top of the head, but somewhere around 22% of businesses were impacted to the point of having to shut down. That's a massive number, and I can't even fathom that now. But
within that,
remember, 87% of the GDP, 87% of our economy is small business, small business owned. So with your point that you just made, if we go into phase 2 before these businesses have had an opportunity to regroup, regather, get some savings under their belt, I think you're absolutely right. I think we're going to see some devastating losses. I think we're going to see some massive shifts in employment, and people are going to be forced to liquidate. That's not great. And I don't know how much more subsidy there is when it's, at this point, in my opinion, it's artificial subsidy to begin with.
Yeah, but I think there'll be a combination. There'll still be demand, which will keep prices stable, if not increasing. Well, at the same time, part of the population is going to be challenged. So it'll be interesting. I don't expect that we're going to see a downturn in the volume of real estate sales or a negative impact on values, at least locally here in Barrie, because again, I think we're still going to see that exodus. There may be shifting around with priorities. Some people will decide, hey, we don't need 3,500 square feet of home. Let's move into a smaller bungalow now. Maybe let's move into a condo. So there'll be some shifting around. I don't expect we'll see a total collapse. So I think what I'm trying to say, speaking to those who own right now, don't worry. I don't believe your value of your investment in your home is going to be hurt in the next while because of this.
I don't think so. I do think that you're going to see people who are making transactions for different purposes than before.
Yeah.
You might see some continued marital separation, and that's unfortunate. But we do talk about the number one reason for divorce typically is financial, and so we might see that. We will continue to see natural life trends like aging. We will see people selling to move into long-term care or repurposing their homes so that they can have long-term care.
Yeah.
What we might see though is we might see families start to consolidate once again, where you'll have the
Well, we're
in-laws.
seeing that now more and more. Yeah. And or looking for that home with a second unit, some income that they can generate in order to carry the home. But I think we're also going to see as well, with more pressure on an already challenged rental market with low inventory of rental property. If more and more people are going to have to make the choice to move into rentals, and those who are in rentals who may have thought to buy, who are going to have to save for a lot longer now to buy, and therefore they're being kept in that market, I think that's going to attract investors as well. It's also going to attract developers who are going to try to build product to service that need. So that's the upside of that, I suppose, is there's an economic plus to demand.
Again, let's look at this historically. If you look at you use the term investors. If you look back in the 60s and 70s in the GTA, there was an absolute hard and fast statement that said no civilization will ever occur or be developed north of Highway 7. That was an absolute law. That was a rule.
Has that changed?
And then there were those outliers, predominantly the Italian community. And if you look at who the greater landholders are today, and they said, great, I don't have any money. I came to this country with literally the shirt on my back, and I worked in manual labor, and I earned $1 an hour or $1 a day, depending on which axe or hammer they were swinging, etc. And they didn't know to put any money into the stock market. They didn't have money to put in the stock market, but they pulled their money together and they bought land for pennies on the dollar.
Farmland in Woodbridge, which for pennies on the dollar at the time.
And they sat for 30 years, and it may be that they were deceased long before that dream was realized, but generationally their family benefit from it. Well, where are we today? You talk about investors, and that may be where we are today, that there might be some people who are sitting on some cash or some ability to find leverage where they will start stockpiling or creating inventory because they believe that we will go through a cycle and we will come out of this scenario when the vaccine occurs. But I think the wrap up on this show, because we're about 30 seconds out, Mike, I think is the fact that if we do go into a second wave, whether that's from a housing stock perspective or an economic perspective on terms of future planning, I think that businesses who are businesses who are existing today need to look at how we can pivot, how we can adapt, how we can predict what tomorrow's consumer is going to need. And even though we never did it yesterday, how can we shift out of our comfort zone and prepare to still be a viable business tomorrow?
And all of us do what we can, or just a public service announcement, do what we can to support those local businesses and industries where and when we can, for sure.
Heading home with Mike and Arif. Enjoyed being here with you. We'll see you next time on Rogers TV Barrie. Take care.